Welcome to Module 5 of the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund Grant Series of informational webinars presented to you today by myself, Dennis Riley, and I am a Regional Advisor for the State Archives. And my partner today is Carrie Lynch, a Grant Specialist here at the State Archives. We hope you've watched and learned a lot from the previous modules. This is the 5th of 6 modules in our LGRMIF grant application training series. You are encouraged to view all of them and view them in order. You certainly don't have to do so, but by doing that, it will give you a more complete and better understanding of the application process and assist you in creating a stronger application. In this installment, we will provide a very brief overview of the eGrant system, but we'll mostly focus on forms you need to complete as part of your application project, as well as how to submit each type, as it will vary slightly depending on the form. At the end, we will also review some tips on preparing and submitting your application as a general review of the other modules. If you've never used eGrants or are otherwise unfamiliar with the system, here is, again, a very brief overview. The Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund application process utilizes an online grant portal referred to as eGrants, which is designed to cover all aspects of the grant process, from the initial application to the submission of any final reports if you are successful and receive an award. Application instructions, guidelines, and forms can all be found in the eGrants portal once a user account has been set up. Each local government has one account, which is managed through your local government's records management officer. Keep in mind, eGrants is a state education department system designed to administer SED grants and awards. It is different and separate from the New York State Grants Gateway. There is a whole other training module that covers eGrants in much more detail, so we encourage you to check that out before watching this one. For this module, we will be discussing the various forms that need to be submitted as part of your application. These are in addition to the narrative portion of the application, which again is covered by a separate module. So be sure to watch those other modules in the series to fully understand the grant program and the application process. The forms we'll be discussing in this module include the application sheet, the institutional authorization form, the payee information form, the standard data capture form, the shared services agreement if applicable, the proposed budget summary, otherwise known as the FS10, and the participating institutional list. The application checklist and forms menu in eGrants are designed to help you navigate the system and to assist you in accessing these forms that are required for your specific project. Additionally, the checklist allows you to monitor your progress in completing the application and the project. So the application checklist includes links to the initial application, the final reporting, and the FS10A amendment. So these links take you to the various forms needed, again, to complete your application and any final reports or amendments if you are successful in receiving an award. As you complete each required online form, be sure to save your work often. You will be timed out of the system after 30 minutes of inactivity. Now that we've gone over in sort of a very brief way some of the basics of the eGrant system, Carrie will have us take a look at the specific forms and the details of the forms that you'll find there that relate to the application process. Take it away, Carrie.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Applying for an LGRMIF grant involves submission of various forms, 2 of which are completely online. Others have to be printed out, signed by hand, and then submitted by regular postal mail. So today I'll walk you through those forms so you'll know what they are and how to find them in eGrants. Each one plays a significant role in the application process. The application sheet is a form that is filled in and submitted entirely online. You can access it from the main menu in your eGrants account. Just sign in, click on your current project number, and you'll see the option for initial application. If you need instructions for obtaining an eGrants account for your local government, or you'd like a refresher about the sign-in process, you can view our online module called How to Use eGrants for more information about requesting an account and also accessing the application portal. After you click on the link for initial application, you'll see that the menu is filled with all of the components necessary to apply for an LGRMIF grant. But right now, we'll just be focusing on the links that deal with submission forms. The application sheet is right at the top of the list and is one of 2 forms that is completed entirely online with no hard copy counterpart. The top portion of the application sheet is static. This information is imported from the New York State Education Department's client database called SEDREF. You cannot edit any of this information. If you find that the contact information in this section needs updating for your local government, you can submit a standard data capture form to the State Archives Grants Unit. We'll update the SEDREF database when your form arrives in our office, at which point eGrants will pull that new information into your application sheet. And we'll talk more about that form in just a little bit. The middle portion of the application sheet can be edited by you, the applicant, and includes contact information for your local government's RMO and project manager, as well as basic information about your local government, such as county, region, and the name of department or the unit that's applying for the grants. The last portion of the application sheet asks you to identify the type of grant for which you're applying, so individual or shared services, and also the project category. Project categories are inactive records, files management, historical records, document conversion and access, and disaster management. Once you've selected from those options, you'll type up a brief summary of your grant proposal. Don't forget to hit save, though, when you're done so you don't lose your data. One thing to note about the application sheet is that you cannot partially complete it and then come back and finish it later. It's the one component of eGrants that needs to be completed and saved all at once. If you don't have all the required information on hand, or you get interrupted while completing the form, just use placeholders such as random letters or numbers for the missing data. The next series of forms that I'll tell you about are the forms that need to be printed out, completed by hand, and submitted through the mail with your application packet. The first one is the institutional authorization form, which can be found under the initial application menu in eGrants. Once you click on the link to the form, you'll find that you can print the HTML version, which is the one that you see in this slide. You can also click on the link for the PDF version of the form, which is located in the lower left-hand corner of the HTML view. That link is highlighted here with a red arrow. The institutional authorization form, though brief, is very important since it shows the grants unit that both the Chief Administrative Officer and the Records Management Officer for a local government are on board with submitting a grant proposal. Note that each of these individuals are required to sign and date the authorization form. Both of those signatures must be original and preferably in blue ink. A missing signature can result in disqualification of the grant proposal, so it's critical that both the CAO and the RMO sign and date the document. Only one institutional authorization form is necessary to include with your application. The next form that needs to be printed from eGrants is the payee information form. The link is located right above the institutional authorization form in the initial application menu. Form W9 is associated with the payee information form and might not be necessary for you to submit, so let's take a look at each one in more detail. There are options for HTML, PDF, and Word versions of these forms, though PDF is our preferred format. Links to all of those formats can be found in the lower left corner of the page. The payee information form allows the New York State Education Department to make payments to your local government if a grant is awarded. While a New York State vendor ID is necessary to receive grant funds, the part of the form that asks for your SAM number only applies to federal funds, so those lines can be left blank. Instructions for this form are not featured in this presentation, but they are included in the downloadable files from eGrants. If your local government does not have a New York State vendor ID, you'll also want to fill out Form W-9 to request one. If you're not sure what your local government's New York State vendor ID is, you can visit portal.nysed.gov to look up that number. The W-9 is part of the same PDF or Word or HTML file as the pay information form, so when you open up that link, just keep scrolling to access the W-9 if you need it. As with the institutional authorization, be sure that the pay information form and the W-9, if necessary, are filled in completely, then signed and dated by the appropriate individual. Be very careful at the top of the form to fill in the proper legal business name of your local government, because any mismatches can cause a delay in receiving your New York State vendor ID. And just as with the institutional authorization, only one pay information form and W-9 are needed with your application. Now, this time, we're going to touch on a form that would only be needed if you are proposing a shared services project and are therefore applying with at least one other local government. In that case, the shared services agreement form should be printed out from eGrants, one for each participating local government, so that each party can sign off on their agreement to the project. It can be found in the same initial application menu as the previous forms and is available as an HTML file on the form's landing page or as a PDF file if you click the link in the lower left-hand corner. Shared services agreement forms should be returned to the lead applicant so that they can scan and upload the agreements to their eGrants account. Also in the realm of shared services, the participating institution list is completed by the lead institution. This form is electronic and is automatically part of your shared services application once you complete it. It can be accessed from the initial application forms menu, and it does not require a signature. You'll be taken to a page where you enter an institution name in a search field, and then you hit the search button. You can then enter part of the name or a whole name. For example, entering East Aurora will give all local governments with the name East Aurora in it. If you're looking for just the village of East Aurora, enter that complete name. Once you have found the correct institution, click the Add button. After you click Add, the name will appear in a list above the Search button section of the page. Do this for each participating institution. It is required that you list all participating institutions in your proposed shared services project. If you need to delete an institution, you can hit the individual delete button in the far right of the saved list. You can also edit the institution's record by hitting the Edit button just to the left of the Delete option. The list of saved institutions has fields for indicating whether a retention schedule was adopted, the year it was adopted, whether an RMO was appointed, and the year of appointment. Once you've completed your list, the system automatically saves it. This list draws from the State Education Department's SEDREF database. If you cannot find an institution, it does not have a record in SEDREF. Contact the Grants Administration Unit at archgrants@nysed.gov if you need to have an institution added to SEDREF. For more information on shared services projects, please see the online module dedicated to shared services proposals. Earlier in this presentation, I mentioned the standard data capture form. This is the document that tells us the contact information and some other basic data about your local government. We use this form to update the New York State Education Department's SEDREF database, which supplies the eGrants portal with some of the information in the application sheet. The standard data capture form used to be a required form in the application packet, but as of the 2021-22 grant cycle, that is no longer the case. This form is now only required if your local government's contact information, or CAO, has changed. You can check on this information by going to the public SEDREF webpage and searching for your institution. Use search terms like County of X or Village of Y because the database is very specific about name order. Asking it for Albany County will return 0 results, but typing in County of Albany will work. Just don't forget to put a % sign at the end to complete the search term, or you'll end up with 0 results again. If you need to update information, you'll find the standard data capture form in eGrants as part of the same PDF containing the payee information form and the W-9. The standard data capture form is the very last section of that file, and the same is true for the Word and HTML versions. Just print it out, fill it in, and scan it, and then you can email it to archgrants@nysed.gov. If you're not able to scan it, you can mail it to us at the Cultural Education Center in Albany. We strongly encourage applicants to check their contact information in the public database and let us know prior to the application deadline if changes need to be made. That way, your current information will appear in the application sheet in your online account, and the correct name of your CAO will print out on your budget forms. Speaking of project budgets, I'd like to conclude our discussion on forms by talking a little bit about the FS10 budget form. This is the form that gets submitted in triplicate with your application. If you receive a grant, 2 of those copies are sent to the State Education Department's Grants Finance Unit for processing, while 1 remains with the State Archives Grants Administration Unit. Unlike the previous forms we've discussed, the FS10 is populated by data entered in the Project Budget section of eGrants, which is found in the initial application menu. This is where you specify anticipated goods, services, and personnel costs for your grant project. As the data is entered and saved, it automatically populates the FS10 budget form. Before we look at the actual FS10 form, we'll take a brief look at what the project budget looks like as you input proposed expenses. This example shows line items in Budget Code 45, which is supplies and materials. All of the possible budget codes appear toward the top left of the page as hyperlinks, so that you can navigate easily from budget code to budget code as you work on your proposed expenses. You'll need to provide details such as vendor or personnel names, quantities, and unit costs. Some information fields are similar from budget code to budget code, while others are unique to certain kinds of category. Each budget code also has a narrative section below the line items so that you can justify the goods or services that you're proposing to buy. Project budgets are worth a significant portion of the final score, so be sure to clearly justify each expense that you request. Once you've completed data input for the proposed budget and you hit Save, you can return to the initial application menu and click on the option for Project Budget Summary FS10, which is the second option down in the slide image. This will allow you to view your budget form and print it out. Be sure to look over each budget code carefully for math errors and double check that all of your proposed purchases are accounted for. No changes can be made to the budget once the application has been submitted, so it's important to make sure that everything is included and that the numbers add up the way you expect, both within the individual budget codes and also in terms of the overall funding amount that your local government is seeking. Once you're satisfied that the proposed budget is ready to submit, you can print out 3 hard copy versions right from the eGrants portal. Page 1 will have your institution's contact information and basic FS10 instructions. The subsequent pages will show all of the possible budget categories, and wherever you entered expenses submitted, those budget items will display in the FS10. In the example here, no one is being hired in Code 15, but 1 inventory clerk is being requested in Code 16. One thing we'd really like to emphasize is that at least one of the 3 FS10s must be signed by your CAO in blue ink. The other 2 may be photocopies of the original, or the CAO may sign all 3 in blue ink so that the grants unit has 3 originals. Once you have those 3 FS10s printed and signed, they can be mailed to us at the New York State Archives along with the institutional authorization form, the payee information form, and, if needed, the W-9. We highly recommend double and triple checking to make sure that all the required forms are present and accounted for, and that all the signatures are included, because these components are mandatory in order for an application to be forwarded to reviewers for funding consideration. To summarize the forms that are part of the LGRMIF application process, here is a short review. The application sheet is filled in and saved completely online. The institutional authorization form, the payee information form, and the W-9 should be printed out from eGrants, filled in manually, and sent in by regular postal mail. Applicants only need to send one of each of these forms. These should be accompanied by the FS10 budget forms, which are auto-populated when the proposed budget is filled in and saved online. The FS10s can then be printed, signed, and mailed in along with the institutional authorization, payee information form, and W-9. Be sure that your application packet is postmarked on or by the application deadline, since mailing it after that date will prevent your project proposal from being forwarded to reviewers for consideration. We ask that none of the forms be stapled. However, paper clips and binder clips are acceptable. The standard data capture form can also be printed from eGrants and filled in manually, but ideally that will be emailed to us ahead of the application deadline so that we can update your local government's contact information. Remember that the top portion of your application sheet pulls its information from the SEDREF database, so you'll want that to be as current as possible when you submit your proposal. Finally, if you're submitting a shared services grant proposal, each participating local government must sign a shared services agreement form. These are printed out, signed, then scanned and uploaded right to the lead institution's eGrants account. The lead institution must also fill in the participating institutions list, which is also completed entirely online. Now, before I hand this presentation back to Dennis, who will cover some great tips about applying for an LGRMIF grant, we want to mention that the forms we've discussed are part of the application process, but do not cover the project narrative itself, which is completed entirely online in eGrants. For information on navigating and completing that part of the grant process, tune into our webinar dedicated entirely to writing an LGRMIF application narrative. And now, here is Dennis back to tell you about tips for applying for the LGRMIF program.
Thank you, Carrie. The following tips are a review of what has been covered in some of the previous modules and reflect areas that are at times overlooked or missed as part of the project planning and the application process. We thought it would be helpful to re-emphasize these points here as part of our wrap-up, but you should also watch the other modules as well, which cover these in much more detail. When planning a project and writing your application, it is important to start early. Don't wait until the last minute. Far too often we encounter applicants who, for a variety of good reasons, do not or cannot allocate sufficient time to their application and wind up either rushing through the submission process and therefore omitting critical information, or worse yet, encounter unforeseen technical issues. This also includes applying for an eGrants user account. Don't wait until the last minute to either register for one or update your information with our grants unit. Each local government is entitled to one user account, and we assign that to the designated records management officer. Be mindful to save your work frequently in eGrants. This will ensure that you don't lose anything should you encounter technical problems, and you will be timed out of the system after 30 minutes of inactivity. When you are completely finished with your application, do not forget to hit the submit button. This may seem obvious, but each year someone forgets to do this before the 5 p.m. deadline. Keep in mind that once you hit submit, you cannot make any changes or additions to your application, so don't accidentally submit your application before it's complete. It is also important to remember that eGrants is not a word processing system and as such has some limitations. We find that applicants have an easier time if they draft their narrative in another program and then copy and paste the text into eGrants. This can facilitate the drafting, editing, and review process before entering the information in eGrants. Again, eGrants is not a word processing program. So if you get creative with formatting your narrative, such as tables or bullet lists, keep in mind you may have to adjust this formatting after pasting into eGrants. Now, such formatting can help organize many of the details of your project, highlight important aspects of your application, and otherwise guide reviewers' attention to important details. But know that you may need to readjust or reapply formatting within eGrants. Therefore, drafting your narrative as plain text, pasting into eGrants, and then applying formatting can sometimes avoid some frustration. As far as attachments go, this may be common practice these days, but get any vendor, contractor, or consultant quotes in an electronic format. This will, of course, make it easier for you to simply upload any required attachments. Make sure any vendor or contractor supplied attachment is legible, and keep in mind that eGrants only supports a limited set of file formats. So for text-based documents, you'll want it in Microsoft Word with a .docx file extension or PDF. Spreadsheets can be in Excel with a .xlsx file extension, and images can be PDF, JPEG, bitmap, or PNG. Please note, do not attach Microsoft Word 2003 files. Those are the ones with the .doc file extension. They should be converted to Word 2007 or later format. And also make sure you have all the required attachments for your specific project. Once you submit your application, you cannot make any changes, as we've stated a few times today. Make sure to proofread and review all the application elements to make sure you are not missing anything. Keep in mind, applications are generally due by 5 p.m. on the day of the deadline, so don't wait until 4:59 or even 4:45 to submit, just in case of any unforeseen circumstances. Again, start planning and writing early. Rushed applications generally do not stand up to reviewer scrutiny, as well as applications that have benefited from a well-planned process. This is where early contact with the state archives can help support your project proposal and ensure you are on track to help address your records management problems. Make sure you put the requested information in the correct sections of the narrative. Often applicants will place information or address different elements in the wrong section. In these instances, reviewers may not score your application as high because they're expecting to find different information. Similarly, do not simply refer to other sections of the narrative or to attachments as your response. So don't expect a reviewer to search through your application to ensure that you have thoroughly addressed a particular section or element or set of requirements. Keep in mind, you only have one application to prepare, whereas review panels have many applications to assess. Make sure you address all the category and the general application requirements. Each project category has a set of specific requirements as outlined in the RFP grant guidelines. Make sure you thoroughly address each bulleted requirement. Do not simply refer to other sections of the application to satisfy this element. Also, make sure you address all the general requirements that are required for all projects. These general requirements are also specified in the RFP grant guidelines, and each one has multiple elements that need to be addressed to ensure your application scores as high as possible. Whenever possible, be specific and detailed in how you address each section or element. Far too often, applicants provide general information or vague statements. For example, if you state a particular methodology is more cost-effective, demonstrate how you determined this to be true. Similarly, do not simply state your local government supports its records management program, but provide concrete examples which demonstrate this. In terms of your budget, make sure you explain how each requested project expenditure is necessary, suitable, and reasonable to ensure the success of your project. For projects that involve digitization, establishing an electronic records management system, relate to electronic records, or involve some sort of technology requirement, make sure your application demonstrates the support and buy-in of your information technology staff. For example, do not simply state that you have the capacity to maintain a particular system or process or workflow. Rather, provide specific details as to your IT environment and that established policies, procedures, and practices exist or will support the long-term success of your project. Now, because you started planning and drafting your application early, you will have ample opportunity to have someone proofread and review your effort. Whether you do this as you complete each section or when you are done with your entire narrative or application package is up to you, but getting a fresh set of eyes on your application will afford you the opportunity to refine and clarify what problem you intend to address and how your proposed project will achieve its intended results. Having someone who is unfamiliar with your proposed project is helpful to spot any inconsistencies or potentially confusing language. Keep in mind, reviewers don't know your specific environment or situation. So if your draft application is confusing or unclear to a colleague or friend, it may also be unclear to the reviewers. That external review by a colleague or a friend or whomever will also help ensure that the parts fit together. The narrative sections in particular should flow and support each other. This is because all the details align and reflect the same information, whether this is in the narrative, the budget, or any attachments. The structure of the narrative builds upon itself from one section to the next, starting with the problem and moving into the methodology and the proposed work plan and the budget. Sometimes it seems applicants start with the budget and work backwards, which is not always a successful approach. Make sure any math in your application adds up, especially from one section to the next. This includes not only your budget narrative and the budget request form, but also vendor quotes and any rates of work in your work plan or any calculations provided to describe the records problem and the anticipated benefits. If you reference an attachment in your narrative, make sure you have successfully uploaded it. And as Carrie just went over in this module, make sure all the necessary forms are submitted. And if you are part of a shared services project, make sure you include the necessary documentation those projects require. Missing forms will impact our ability to review your application. And finally, every year, someone forgets to sign a form where they need to. Don't leave this to the last minute either. Missing signatures, as Carrie emphasized, will affect our ability to process your application. The eGrants user manual is an often overlooked yet vital resource. The user manual, as the name implies, is your primary resource on how to navigate the eGrants environment. It also provides important information in successfully submitting your application. It includes screenshots that provide an easy step-by-step reference to navigating the system and submitting your application. And if you are awarded a grant, it also contains helpful information about using eGrants to manage your project, as well as how to submit final reports. Now, whenever you have a question, contact the State Archives. Your regional advisor can support your efforts by helping you define your records problem and the scope and scale of your project. Consider them your first stop in supporting your records management program. They can help guide you as you plan your project and help ensure your project is feasible, appropriate, and eligible for our grant program. Their job is to help you make the best decisions to meet your needs within your specific set of circumstances. And our colleagues in the grants unit can help you navigate technical issues related to eGrants and will help set up or reset your user accounts. So in conclusion, as with any records or archives question, don't hesitate to contact us at the State Archives. If you have questions about using eGrants, general MWBE issues, or completing the administrative forms, contact the State Archives Grant Unit at the email address listed here. And if you have questions related to records management and writing the grant application narrative, please reach out to your regional advisory officer. If you don't know who that is, please visit our website using the address listed here. And with that, we thank you for listening to our presentation.